Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I have my February wrap up. This month I read a total of 10 books and 1 DNF. I read mostly from my sister's TBR. If you didn't watch my Vlogmas videos, my sister made me a special TBR of books that she wanted me to read. Some of them were books that she liked and wanted me to also like. Some of them were books that she didn't understand and wanted to talk about, and others were just books that she thought I would like. And I also read some other books that I'm going to talk to you about. Let's first start with my sister's books. The first book that I read this month was You'd Be Mine by Erin Hahn. I gave this one a total of 3 stars. In this book, we follow an 18-year-old country music star named Clay Coolidge. He is going to his record label's office after he had a physical altercation with the CEO's son at a bar, and his summer tour has already sold out. So his label is trying to clean up his image. To do that, they want him to fly to Michigan and try to convince Annie Mathers to join as his opening act. Annie is the daughter of country music royalty, basically. Her parents were a very famous country couple, and they both died in a suicide pact when she was around 13. Because of that, she was raised by her grandmother in Michigan, really far away from the spotlight. But of course, she still loved music, so she makes music with 2 friends and posts it on YouTube, and that's how most labels discover her. However, this entire synopsis of Clay having to fly to Michigan to convince Annie to join his tour happens in the first 30 pages of the book. So the rest of the novel, we just follow the tour and the romance that blooms between Annie and Clay. My biggest problem with this book, and the main reason why I gave this 3 stars, was that it didn't really know where it wanted to stand. Whilst we have some really light and fluffy scenes of tour hangouts, promotional shoots, the actual concerts, and even the found family aspect within the touring bands, we also have some really hard-hitting topics, such as underage drinking and drug use, traumatic experiences, grief, fame, the music industry. I don't mind those hard-hitting topics inserted into lighter narratives, but I found the tone shifts really drastic here. I'm only giving this a 3 star because I think the second half of the book really peaks up, especially because the author decides to lean into just one of those aspects, in this case, the drama. And she does that by delving really deep into the backstory of only one of our characters, in this case, Clay. I think this shift into several chapters strictly from Clay's point of view really worked, and we get to dive really deep into his backstory, his relationship with his brother Daniel, his guilt over his brother's untimely death, his relationship with Fritz, who is Daniel's best friend and his current bandmate, also his relationship with Daniel's fiance and his niece, with music and fame, with his own persona as Clay instead of his real name Jefferson. We never dive as deep into Annie's backstory, to the point where I thought maybe the book could have been better if we didn't have those dual points of view and just focused on Clay instead. One other aspect that I didn't enjoy, and I am now adding to my don't read list, was the underage drinking and overall how the book took alcoholism as not as important as drug use. One of our characters only hits rock bottom once he uses drugs for the first time. Up until that moment, his alcoholism is just seen as okay, and I really didn't enjoy that. But overall, I think Clay as a character and his arc really worked for me, so that's why I'm giving this a 3 star. The next book that I read was The Great Unknowable End by Catherine Ormsby. I gave this 4.5 stars. I think this was one of my favorites of the entire TBR. It gave me very much 2014 YA vibes with a speculative / unexplained weirdness twist, and without the unnecessary romance of 2014 YA. In this book, we are seeing a small town in Kansas called Slater go through the end of the world through the eyes of 2 specific characters, Stella and Galliard. Stella is a middle child of a blue-collar family, working 2 jobs to support them whilst taking care of her little sister Jill. Their mother committed suicide 8 years ago, and Craig, the oldest brother, ran away from home 2 years prior to join the hippie commune of the city called Red Sun. Galliard, our other main character, was born and raised in Red Sun, and he believed he was destined to be the commune's resident artist until a new boy named Phoenix takes his spot. Because of this, Galliard decides that he is going to join his best friend Archer for the crossing for the first time. The crossing is basically a period in which the commune allows teenagers during the summer to leave the commune confines. After they turn 16, however, they must choose if they're going to stay with the commune or if they're going to leave forever. This is Galliard's last summer to cross because he's turning 16. I think this book was exactly what I wanted it to be without even knowing. So here are some of the things that I enjoyed in this novel. Spoilers ahead. I enjoyed that Stella and Galliard were not a romantic pairing. They have some romantic scenes, but they are not a couple. I also enjoyed that the end of the world is completely unexplained. Two aspects that I loved the most in this novel were the familial relationships and dynamics that are explored through Stella's family, as well as the rock stars motif with Galliard. The motifs not only ground us in the time of the novel, in this case the 70s, but they also gave Galliard a personality trait and became a beacon throughout the story, a line that carried us from the first page up until the very end. Even if it was quirky, I think it was really well placed. Why am I not giving this book a 5-star then? I think it was a little bit too long, especially the chapters from Galliard's point of view. Sometimes he just talked in circles for pages on end. If the edit had been a little bit tighter, I think this book could have been a lot more punchier. The next book that I read was These Violent Delights by Micah Nemirever. I gave this 4 stars. I am really surprised at how much I enjoyed this. I think the language and the subject matter was very much my taste, to the point where I could really overlook the lack of research, some of the sparse plotting, and the overall timeline. In this book, we are following Paul and Julian. They are university freshmen in 1970s in Pittsburgh. They're both geniuses, basically. Paul is a Jewish boy from a working class family. He is studying ecology and really suffering from the recent death of his father, who was a police officer who committed suicide. Julian, on the other hand, is a wealthy son of a politician/politician adjacent guy, also from a Jewish background, who is intent on breaking from his family's hold. The book is told from Paul's point of view, who idolizes Julian and who sees everything that he does as a way to show how inferior he actually is. Their friendship spirals quickly into intimacy as you see them working towards the act committed on the very first chapter of the book, the murder of a man named Charlie. Here are some things that I liked. Paul as a character, he was too smart for his own sake. He was really trying to piece together his own feelings of not belonging, not feeling worthy, through his own rational and scientific way of seeing life. This self-loathing is really exacerbated by the fact that he is a loner. He is a queer Jewish boy who is really struggling with grief and fitting in, and finds somehow another queer Jewish boy who is everything he always wanted to be. He thinks Julian is fascinating, and he wants really badly to also be seen fascinating by him. As terrible of a person as Julian was, I felt for him so much, and I think most of my enjoyment of this book hinders on the fact that I loved Julian as a character so much. Another aspect that I really liked was the Jewish community and the contrast between these two families. Paul's family has been completely severed after his father's passing. They barely speak to each other, but they still continue their customs. They still continue to stick together. Whilst Julian's family is a dream. They fit right in with high society in DC by whitewashing themselves. And Julian is forced to follow the steps that were laid out for him, steps that they all worked so hard to create. This duality with this same relatively small community was very interesting to see, as well as the way the author showed this duality through very minute details. For example, Julian's family isn't kosher, and Paul realizes that when he is at a party at Julian's house and everything has a bit of pork in it. But there were some things that I didn't like, and the reason why I gave it 4 stars. I think it was a bit meandering and unnecessarily long. I have been finding books long recently, as you can tell, and this one wasn't an exception. especially because most of the scenes were basically vignettes without much explanation on what happened before or after that specific moment in time. And yet it still managed to be really bogged down with the amount of words in it, especially in Paul's monologue, which was really lengthy and dry. Another thing that I didn't like was the semblance of plot with Charlie's murder, because it is just a catalyst for the final confrontation between Paul and Julian. So it wasn't really thought out or explored as well as it could have been. It was more of a thing that exposes the dark corners of them as people and sort of brings them together to break them apart. The next book that I read was We Are Inevitable by Gail Forman. I gave this 3 stars. This was a substitution for The Diviners by Liba Bray, made by my own sister, as I talked to her about each of the books as soon as I finished them. And this was good because I think this is exactly the type of book that I associate with her. Almost like a Hallmark movie, but with a touch of heavier themes. In this book, we are following Aaron Stein as his family's business, a bookshop in Washington State, falls apart. His father, Ira, is really struggling financially, and his mother left them after his older brother, Sandy, passed away. Aaron then decides to sell the bookstore to a woman who has been buying most of the failing businesses in this part of town. But after he does so, he cannot bring himself to tell his father about it, even when several other people from the community start to slowly want to improve the bookstore by making an entrance ramp, diversifying what they sell, including a coffee shop and selling records, fixing up shelves. The book is quite straightforward. Everything you think will happen actually happens. Because of that, it's not much out of the ordinary, so that's why it's getting a 3-star. As much as I appreciated everything that it had to say on disability, on grief, on addiction, I still think it was too much of a Hallmark movie for me to truly enjoy it. The next book that I read was Icebreaker by A.L. Grazide. I gave this 4 stars. I am really surprised by the amount of hockey in this particular hockey romance, especially because it was a recommendation from my sister and she doesn't like hockey. In this book, we are following Mickey James III as he starts his first year at Heartland University and is currently the NHL's first draft pick. The only other person standing in his way of fulfilling his family's legacy is Jason Caulfield, who has built himself from the ground up as a black hockey player and is fighting for the top pick spot. Of course, as you can gather, these rivals are going to turn into lovers. The amount of hockey in this book was really something different from my previous encounters with hockey romances, not only because both of our characters are hockey players, but because the game is an integral part of their connection. Most other university level hockey romances that I've read, hockey is merely a backdrop, but here it is full on center. I also enjoyed how Mickey's development was not only regarding his feelings for Jason, but also regarding his depression, his daddy issues, but most importantly, regarding how he actually felt about the sport. One other aspect that I really enjoyed and was surprised by was the language used. The dialogue here was some of the best I've read. I think it was incredibly natural and made me feel like I was watching a movie. Why am I not giving it 5 stars then? Well, I think the ending was a little bit too infuriating. And here I'm opening a discussion about open-ended books. Whilst here, I didn't like it, in The Great Unknowable End, I really enjoyed the open end. And I think the main difference is where we leave our characters. Here in Icebreaker, I feel like we haven't completely settled after their development as characters. Whilst in The Great Unknowable End, I feel like we have completely settled. I can see wherever these characters go, they are now different people than they were at the beginning of this book. Here in Icebreaker, that is still the case, but I felt like it was a little bit too fresh off of that climax, and is one of the reasons why I didn't find the ending fulfilling enough. I think this book would benefit a whole lot from a holiday novella, ebook type of thing, especially to see where their relationship is at now. Another thing that I didn't like was, again, the unaddressed alcohol use, which I discovered is a little bit of a nick and apparently a non-negotiable for me. And in my opinion, there was a lack of sex/steam that I noticed, especially because it is mentioned so many times how they were having sex and have lots of sex, but none of that is on page. Sadly, the last book from my sister's TBR was a DNF. It was Fool Me Once by Ashley Winstead. I complained to my sister whilst I was reading this book that I really hated the main character, and I was hoping that she would grovel really hard to compensate for how shitty she was to her love interest, but my sister said that she doesn't, so I didn't want to continue and find out. There is this sentence in the book where the main character's sister says to her, "No one wants to watch people they don't like falling in love." And sadly, I feel like I am at that stage of life, and maybe one day I won't be and we'll revisit the story, but that day sadly is not today. Overall, I think the experiment of reading my sister's TBR was really interesting. I can see how some aspects of these books are all the same, and we'll be looking forward to recommending books to her now that have those aspects, and also seeing where our tastes align and where they differ. But other than that, I still read 5 books. The first being The Rose Bargain by Sasha Payton Smith, which I gave 3 stars. This is a historical romantasy set in a fictional England, ruled by an immortal fae queen. She continues in power by gifting each citizen a bargain. They exchange something that she wants in place of a dying wish. So a plot of land for a tooth, a better memory for a finger. We are going to be following Ivy Benton as she enters the wedding season. Because of this bargain system, most noble girls use the favor to get better looks or better skills that will win them better suitors. But Ivy knows that there's nothing she can ask for that will help her family right now. Her family's social standings is in complete shambles because her older sister Lydia spent the 2 years of her wedding season and never got married. And worse, she doesn't even recall what she bargained for. But this time, her season has a twist. There will be a competition for Bram's hand in marriage. He is the Fae Prince. After Ivy wins the first task in the competition and gets crowned, Emmett, the human prince and Bram's stepbrother, decides to help Ivy win his brother's heart. But for a price. She must be the one to win because with the 2 crowns, she will be able to overturn the queen and break every bargain she ever made. I ended up not really loving this one. Everything is a bit too convoluted, and it seems the author didn't really research England in the 1800s. The writing is also very jovial, I would say. Language and titles that don't exactly fit in the time period. There are a lot of repetition errors, characters doing the same action twice, missing out who is actually speaking, etc. Ivy's characterization in particular is really weird. Sometimes she's a noble brat who is really worried that she was coddled too much by her family to survive this competition, whilst other times she says that she had to learn to grow up quicker because of her parents' lack of money and knows how to do things that other nobles don't. The same disparities also happens with Lydia's disappearance and her overall 2 years during her social season after her botched bargain with the queen. It was almost like the night Alison de Laurentiis went missing in Pretty Little Liars. Everything happened during those 2 years and we're just learning like bit by bit by bit. While the writing was really fun, very YA, the romance was really cute, it also had those really gross juvenile errors of characterization, plot holes, lack of understanding of the universe used as a setting. I only gave this 3 stars because I did feel like it was a really easy commercial romantasy. Even with the plot holes, it was a really easy read. I flew through it. I read it in like 2 sittings, I think, and I am still really interested in seeing where we go from here after the plot twist at the end. This is the first book in a duology. Another thing that I really enjoyed, and I think is one of the strongest suits of this particular book, was the exploration of the sister relationships between Ivy and Lydia. They had some incredible scenes together, talking about the responsibility of being a sister, about the pain and jealousy and care and love that they have for one another. It was really well done, and I'm excited to see how this relationship will grow or change in the next book. The next book that I read was Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros, which I mentioned in my last month's vlog. I gave this 3 stars. I have a really strong love and hate relationship with the Empyrean series. I read Fourth Wing as soon as it came out, and I had some friends that read ahead of me and said that the cliffhanger on Iron Flame was really bad, and because of that, I waited until Onyx Storm was released to read books 2 and 3 back to back. Iron Flame was really difficult for me to rate because I really loved part 1. I was interested in learning about how the rebellion works, seeing Violet as sort of like a double agent inside Basquiat, her connection with her squad, and learning more information about the world that could be of help for the rebellion. I also liked seeing Basquiat as a second-year student, seeing the new students, going back to classes, etc. The villain in this part was also really compelling and actually scary, in my opinion. And even the final scene felt like a final scene of a book. I would give the first part a 4-star, but that's not where the book ends. We continue with the second part, and I found that extremely boring. It was just a bunch of information I couldn't exactly grasp, a lot of lore being dumped in the really weird way. For example, Violet understanding things from bits and pieces of conversations that she overhears, and then throwing all of her learning and her actual conclusions into someone's face simply for shock value. I was completely lost while Violet was really in control of what was happening, and I really disliked that. It was convoluted. I struggled to follow a lot of the time. I didn't care for much of what was happening, and for some reason, even though Xaden and Violet were apart during the first part, I felt their romance carried a lot more than here. The entire ask me about anything bit that Xaden was doing was really boring and annoying, in my opinion, especially because he basically didn't want to talk about his life and blamed Violet for not asking the right questions. And then when she asked the right question, he completely fumbled. I don't know, I really disliked that. And to be honest, as much as people hyped the cliffhanger, I didn't find it very compelling. I felt like it was the natural progression of the story. I don't know. So because of the second part being so bad compared to the first one, I had to settle in the middle of the road 3-star. Onyx Storm, however, I gave this 3.75 stars. My enjoyment of Iron Flame was really high at the beginning and then dropped drastically. Onyx Storm's reading experience was a much more level. I felt meh throughout the entire story. I think the author has a really strong suit in writing banter, but the romance between Xaden and Violet is no longer carrying me throughout the story like it did with Fourth Wing and especially the beginning of Iron Flame. I am starting to grow more and more annoyed at how dragged out this story feels like, and a part of me is starting to wonder if the author even knows where we are going from here, because right now I feel like we're at a corner. Here are some things that I disliked. The entire start of the book with the council, the Navarian students, the not trusting the students that fled to Arisha, not trusting Griffith Flyers. It made sense, but it was boring. And I think that is how I feel about the series right now. I feel like the progression makes total sense, but I still find it a little bit boring. I enjoyed the found family aspect of the squad, but some of the characters were so less developed than others that I felt their death coming from a mile away. I don't know if you guys feel that too. One character that I hated, Halden, so boring. I really don't care that Violet has an ex-boyfriend, and I think her and Xaden's relationship is so beyond past the jealousy trope that I found him and his drama completely unnecessary and could have been cut out entirely. The exploration of the world in this book was okay, but I still feel like it was a little bit too late. We're in the third book of a series. I think it is a little bit too late for me to just now be learning there are islands in this world and there are gods, more gods than we talk about. I don't know. I think the world building in this series is the weakest aspect, and because the romance is no longer carrying me like it did in the beginning, I'm starting to worry about where we are going from here. I also love Dane. If you guys watched my love triangle video essay that I posted during Vlogmas, then you will know that. But I don't like that he's probably going to be endgame with Sloane. I don't know why I see Sloane as a child, even though she isn't, and I find it a little bit uncomfortable, her relationship with Dane. And for the amount of videos I saw on TikTok of people talking about Dane, there are very little scenes of him. Like, I wanted more of him and also more of Sawyer. But here are some things that I did like and the reasons why I gave this 3.75. First, Andarna's kind. I find the entire premise of a dragon kind that do not want to be used as weapons by humans so interesting and incredibly exciting for the rest of the series to come. I am not as confident the author will pull off this entire idea in the way that I want her to, but I am still very excited and intrigued. Another thing that I really enjoyed was the fact that Xaden gave in to the Vernon part of him. It had to happen, in my opinion, and I'm glad that the author didn't shy away from that. I just hope that she sticks the landing with the entire cure thing. The plotline of Violet being dedicated to the Dune goddess was really interesting as well. Mainly because now I feel like her father is finally a real character instead of a plot savior. He clearly makes mistakes. He wasn't perfect. He has feelings. He was completely irrational when it came to his children. I think this plotline really developed a character that we don't have on page, and I really liked that. And another aspect that I liked was the entire idea that Violet's mom was created by the universe to counteract the silver-haired Betty on the Vernon side. I think that is just so cool. It really shows how long these creatures have lived for and how small Violet is in the grand scheme of things. I am also really excited to learn who Violet is counteracting in their squad. Overall, I think my reading experience of Onyx Storm was a whole lot better than my experience reading Iron Flame, which is why it has a high rating. But I still think the series could have been tighter like it was in book 1. It feels like the author is still trying to figure out where we go from here, and I don't know if I am trusting her to get us there. The next book that I read was Nettle by Bax Hogan. I gave this 2 stars. This is a fairy tale inspired YA fantasy. It is super short, very whimsical ambience with very little romance. And I think for that reason, it just wasn't for me. We follow Nettle, a girl who doesn't really fit in and was raised by her grandmother and fairy tales until her grandma gets extremely sick and Nettle is laying in a bed of actual nettles and prays to the night sky that something or someone saves her grandma. That's how she falls through a portal to the Fae realm. There she is taken to the king, and he agrees to save her grandma if she completes 3 tasks for him. But, of course, he's a Fae king, and this deal is full of tricks. Throughout the course of the story, Nettle will have to be smart and complete these impossible tasks whilst living and surviving in the Fae realm, where everyone basically hates humans. She meets a human boy named Connor, who becomes a friend. She also meets other magical creatures like goblins and a talking spider. All the while, she's sort of protected by a shadow fairy named Elian, who is tasked by the king to take care of her and report back on all of her findings. The story is cute, but I think the execution is really lackluster. I did not think the writing was atmospheric enough to counterbalance the really empty dialogue. And because it reads like a fairy tale, the entire plot is extremely convenient. Nettle is never in really much danger. The romance she has with both Connor and Elian is really weak, and overall everything just happens to her. The plot doesn't have any adventure or romance, just this light magical ambience that is both quirky and whimsical and a little bit disturbing, that wants to carry me throughout these 200 pages, but it is too little to do that. And the last book that I read this month was Rivermouth, a chronicle of language, faith, and migration by Alejandra Oliva. This is a memoir from a Mexican-American translator and immigrant justice activist from her years during Trump's first presidency. The book is divided into 3 parts. The first following Alejandra in Tijuana in 2019. in the aftermath of the migrant caravan, focusing specifically on the idea of border crossing. The second part follows her experience at an asylum workshop run by the New Sanctuary Coalition in New York in 2016, where she helped immigrants fill out the I-589 form, which is needed to apply for asylum. The third part shows her experience at a Boston courtroom where she did accompaniment work, watching people defend themselves against deportation through video trials, and also a Mississippi detention center, which she visited that same year. All of these moments and spaces are visited with the permeating theme of translation and language. I thought I'd enjoy this book more than I did. From the preface, you can see that this book was written for a specific target audience, and I am not the target audience, so I am chucking most of my lack of enjoyment to that. Parts that I enjoyed the most were the explorations and the showcases of the American immigration system. I thought I would enjoy more the translation and language discussions. I think as a non-monolingual Latin American person, most of these discussions were already part of my personal repertoire. For example, the decision to not translate several of the conversations held throughout the book must have hit a whole lot harder for people that don't have any knowledge in Spanish. Overall, I think this book wasn't exactly made for me, and that is okay, and is why I am not rating it. I think this was a great reading month for me. I am attempting something different with my reviews and my setup and my editing, so let me know if this is good or bad, and I'll catch you guys up next month. Bye!